Welcome back to Small Business CRE, episode 2. Today, talking about 10 red flags in commercial leasing that you as a small business owner need to watch out for. And a few of these, if you see them, you should run away real quick. All right, before we get into it, these are the top 10 things that we're going to be talking about. I'm not going to run through them here because we're going to talk about more in a second, but we're going to talk about vague definitions, capital improvements, unreasonable language in the lease, vague renewal options. All these items are things we're going to run into in more detail. But first, why should you even listen to me? Who am I? My name is Dan Logan. I'm a commercial real estate agent working in my own local market in the Midwest. I've helped over 100 small business owners navigate these questions and get into spaces for their business. So this is real world experience. I've seen real leases, real problems, and real solutions. So that's where a lot of this is coming from. I've helped insurance companies, construction companies, restaurants, coffee shops, kind of a wide gamut of businesses. So red flag number 1, vague or missing CAM definitions. And CAM, that's common area maintenance or repairs and maintenance in the lease. So what you need to be looking for here, there's essentially 3 ways that repairs and maintenance works for a commercial property, a triple net commercial property. So this is where the tenant handles it and pays it directly. So you as a tenant, you will probably be responsible for some basic repairs and maintenance, light bulbs, changing out filters, minor paint touch-ups, things like that, clogged toilets. You as a tenant are responsible for those items and you pay for them, and that's fine. And there's things the landlord pays that are not billed back. So these are landlord expenses. So these would be large capital expenditure items such as the roof, any foundation damage, parking lots, major HVAC replacement sometimes, anything structural for the building, utility lines, anything structural. That's a landlord responsibility that shouldn't be billed back to you as the tenant. The landlord pays for that directly. Then the third option is the landlord pays for it and it's billed back to you as a part of the triple net, as a part of the common area maintenance. And this is the real red flag area. Is what should be in here are things like landscaping, snow removal, shared utilities. If it's a big office building that has like a shared lobby and bathroom, you're going to have cleaning costs, or you're going to have the utilities of that space. These are all things that are reasonable for a landlord to handle, and they bill back to you as a part of the triple net. You want to make sure these items aren't also including the bigger expenses that are over here. So you got to read this language very closely, or if this language doesn't exist in your lease, but it's a triple net lease and it's super vague, major red flag. You need to make sure that your lease spells out all 3 of these items very clearly so you don't have any surprises later. Red flag number 2, kind of the same thing, but if you have capital improvements hidden in that CAM, in that common area maintenance or that triple net clause, that should not be in there. There's some gray area here, and it's going to vary a lot lease to lease. But generally speaking, these items are things that should not be a part of your triple net. So full roof replacement, foundation and structure repairs, major plumbing and electrical to the building, large HVAC systems, and then entire parking lot replacements. Parking lot striping or resurfacing, that might be fine. But if they're replacing, all the asphalt, that shouldn't be a part of your common area maintenance. Make sure you read the section of the lease very closely. And if that does include these items as a part of triple net, you should try and get those out, redline those out. All right, next one. This is kind of more of an orange flag, to be honest, but just something to watch for is personal guarantees. Personal guarantees, they're there for a reason. The landlord is taking on a risk having you as a tenant, and they want to make sure that you can't just leave and leave them out of all that rent. So personal guarantees aren't necessarily bad, but if there's no cap or no time limit on a longer, like 5-year lease, I would try to get that in there, because personal guarantees mean that you are liable personally, not just your business. So if your business fails, the landlord can come after you personally and sue you personally for the unpaid rents or any damages or anything like that. So what you want to watch out for is an unlimited personal guarantee for extended periods of time, 5 years. And try, if you can, don't try to get rid of it. I mean, you can try, but a lot of landlords want it. But try and push for a burn-off clause. So where if you pay rent on time, if you're a good tenant for 2 to 3 years, the personal guarantee goes away. It's just less risk for you and for anyone who would be associated with you. By the way, if you want some more information on this type of stuff, I've got a free PDF you can download down below. Top 5 leasing mistakes I see small business owners make. And also understand, though, be reasonable with this. Depending on your risk profile, if you're a brand new business and you have no track record, or if the landlord has invested a lot of money up front into your build out or to improving the building for you, then it makes a lot more sense to have that personal guarantee. So again, kind of an orange flag here. All right, number 4, red flag. Escalation clauses that are above market standards. So what you need to watch out for, I saw a lease the other day that had a 10% annual escalation. So each year the rent went up by 10%. I talked to her and she was able to negotiate that back down. Market standard, at least where I'm from, is 2.5 to 3.5%. We're seeing some landlords go to 4% or even 5%, but that's really pushing it. Although I do understand with inflation these days. The other things you should watch for are CPI based escalations. So a lot of landlords are trying to tie the annual escalation to the consumer price index. So they're tying it to inflation, which makes sense, but that means that that risk is passed on to you, the tenant. So if you look at the CPI, you'll see that a lot of years have been 2 or 3 or 4%, which is reasonable. We've had some years that are 7 and 8%. And so that would be a big increase to your rent. And so if at all possible, if this language isn't there, try to set a cap to it. You'll also see some landlords that do a CPI or a set amount, whichever is greater. So a CPI or 3%. Again, it's an orange flag. I get it from the landlord's perspective, but with this case, they're essentially getting the best of both worlds. They keep that at a base or they get more. So push back on this a little bit if you can. But if you see anything crazy, a 10% or more, really push back. That's a red flag unless there's a reason for it. Like if you negotiated a significantly lower rent to start out, and the agreement was that you'll move up to asking rent sooner by doing the annual escalation, that makes sense. Okay, another orange flag: unclear tenant use or missing exclusivity. So this is just kind of back to the language of the lease. You need to make sure that your actual business use and the way your business operates is described. There's usually a section in the lease, it's called tenant use. And what you want to make sure is it's not just super vague or it's not just a carryover from the previous lease. So if it just says office and storage, but if you're a restaurant, that's not protecting you. If there ever became an issue and ever went to court, there could be an argument that says, well, the lease didn't allow them to be a restaurant, even though it was obviously a restaurant. If that use just says office and storage or something that isn't actually your business, you're not protected. So make sure that language is really clear. And then this is very specific, but if you're a business that doesn't want to have a competitor right next door, and if it's a multi-tenant building, push for an exclusivity clause if it's not offered. If you sell chicken wings, and if another chicken wing store moved in right next door, that'd be a problem for you. So try and get that exclusivity clause written into the lease, and don't just count on a handshake agreement or a verbal agreement from the landlord that, I won't rent to a competitor. Make sure you get that in writing. Again, this is a specific one, but if it's important to your business, you want to have it in there. All right, number 6, red flag. Vague, and a lot of vague language, red flags here. Vague TI allowance, that's tenant improvement allowance language, and build out language. So if you're moving into a space and if you're having to do a lot of renovations, or if it's just a shell space and you're having to build out all of it, and either you're building it or the landlord's building it, or if the landlord's offering you a TI allowance to help build it, make sure it's all in writing, because if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So you need to understand how much, what are the dollar amounts of the TI allowance? When is that paid? Make it very clear. What's the trigger? Is it when you get the certificate of occupancy? Is it upon substantial completion? Is it when the contractor says it's done? Like, what triggers that TI allowance getting paid? Also, make sure you understand who's the contractor, who's doing the work. Can you do the work? Like, does it have to be a licensed contractor? Make sure this is well stated. And then the bigger one is just timing. So if you're counting on the landlord to either do the build out for you, or maybe you're waiting on the landlord for, to do a permit with the city or whatever, you want to make sure that there's something that protects you if that landlord is taking longer than they should. And there'll be a vice versa of this protecting the landlord. But if the landlord said, I'll have the construction done in a month, and your lease starts in a month, and the construction's not done, and you start paying rent, but the construction's not done, that's an issue. So you need to have some kind of language in there giving you a rental abatement period that says, if it's not, maybe you agree to start paying August 1st, but if the construction is not done, then it gets pushed back until the construction is done. Or if it takes so much longer, if you're 3 months behind schedule, you might want to have an exit clause entirely, so that if it's just taking so much longer, you're not still tied to that lease without being able to operate your business. So make sure you potentially have some exit language to where if it's just taking so much longer, you can get out of it. And there'll probably be a version of this for the landlord too, but make sure you're protected. Again, these leases are generally written by the landlord, so you have to kind of protect yourself. So make sure that language is not vague. Don't count handshake agreements. Okay, another orange flag, vague renewal option language. So renewal options are essentially if you have you sign a 5-year lease, and then you have a 5-year renewal option. That means at the end of the 5 years, it's your choice as a tenant if you want to stay or if you want to leave. The landlord can't just kick you out. Um, but the issue here is some leases will be written that you have a 5-year renewal option, all terms to be the same except for the rent. So this is saying that everything we previously agreed to in the lease, that all stays the same except for the rent. Or it might say market rent at that time to be renegotiated, rent to be renegotiated. So the problem with that is you essentially don't have a renewal option in that case. Because if that lease says rent to be renegotiated at renewal or except for rent, that means that maybe the landlord thinks, oh, rent's gone up 50% in that time. And they can come at you with that new number. Well, now it's up to you. So, if you don't agree to that new rent number, you have to leave. And so if you have a renewal option, make sure it's very clear that all the terms stay the same, including the rent, if at all possible. And of course, it will probably increase, but you want to push for the same increases you've been having. So if you've been having 3% escalations each year, try to get that same language in there. If you have a renewal option and it says to be renegotiated, that's essentially not a renewal option. So watch for that. Another red flag, unreasonable default or remedy language or other legalese language. Now, I'm not going into this too deep. This is really attorney territory, but some basic things to watch for. Cure periods. So this is if you do something wrong, if maybe you're late on a payment or whatever it might be, there should be a period of time that you can make it right. So if you're late on your rent and you're 1 week late, and then you pay the landlord, but the landlord says, oh, you were late, so you default to the lease, so I can kick you out. There should be a reasonable way for you to make things right. And so you have a cure period. Make sure that's in there. Landlord obligations. If there will be a section in there about probably remedies or landlord obligations, tenant obligations. Just make sure that you have some rights too. What if the landlord's doing something wrong? What if they're not repairing items on time? Make sure that if they're breaching the lease, you have a remedy as well. You can leave the lease, whatever it might be. You can fix it yourself and reduce it from rent. Again, this is attorney territory, but make sure you have some options as well. Make sure it's not just all one-sided language. Again, these leases are usually written by the landlord's attorney, but there should still be some fairness in there, and you have some protections as well as a tenant. Please hire an attorney. Absolutely worth it. Another one, high penalties, high late payment or holdover rent. So late fees, that's a pretty obvious one. If you're late on paying rent, and again, best case scenario, just avoid this. But if you are late on paying rent, make sure the penalty isn't egregious. I saw one where the tenant was leasing a really small space and they were only paying $1,000 a month, but then their late payment was like $100 every day they were late. So here pretty soon they're doubling their rent just because they're late by a week. So again, there should be a penalty if you're being late. Just make sure it's reasonable. Holdover rent, that's kind of more the big one. Holdover rent is if at the end of your lease term, you stay in the space, but you and the landlord haven't reached an agreement yet. You're essentially holding over in the space beyond your agreed upon term. There usually is an increase here that says if you stay in the space longer, you're paying some extra rent. I mean, I'd like to see 115%, 125%, which means you're paying your rent plus 25%. It doesn't mean you're paying double. But I've seen somewhere it's 200%. So you're paying double rent as soon as that happens. Well, that doesn't really motivate the landlord at all to help renegotiate that term. So again, just try to make these reasonable. There's going to be some kind of penalty there or holdover rent, additional rent, but try and make it reasonable. And finally, number 10, red flag. And this isn't maliciousness, but it just happens. Watch for conflicting lease language or missing exhibits. Remember, this landlord, they probably have multiple properties. They probably have multiple tenants. Maybe they've been doing this for years and years. And maybe that lease template is years old. So all they're doing when you come to sign a lease is they're taking an old lease template and they're changing some of the details and they're giving it to you. And that leads to a lot of errors. So just make sure you're not running into, section references that point to the wrong place, exhibits that are mentioned, refer to exhibit A and there's no exhibit A. Watch for that. Make sure there's not conflicting language within the lease. So if triple net's described this way up here, but then in the additional rent it's described this way, just make sure it all makes sense. Make sure that the actual entities, the names of you and the landlord are accurate, the addresses are accurate. Make sure there's not old, information in there. and make sure the dates, the terms, the rents, they all match up to what you agreed upon earlier. Just read through it carefully. It's absolutely worth going page by page, line by line. This is a binding contract you'll be stuck in for years. Look through it in detail. Hire an attorney. Don't just count on AI to review it for you. Okay. So again, in summary, watch for vague CAM definitions, personal guarantees. I'm just running through it here. Above mark escalations, all of these things, red flags, orange flags. It's very situation dependent, but just watch for these. And if you see them, take a step back and just try to clarify or negotiate or clear some of those items up. Bottom line, a bad lease is incredibly hard to get out of, and it's far more expensive to try and get out of it after the fact than it is just to hire an attorney up front. None of these items are impossible to deal with. And in fact, most of them aren't even malicious. They're just errors usually. But you should try and push back where it makes sense. The problem is that many small business owners don't know they can do that with the lease, but you absolutely can when it comes to commercial leasing. Make sure you're protected. Make sure it's a good win-win situation for both you and the landlord. Again, if you want some more information on this, I've got a free PDF you can download down below. Top 5 commercial leasing mistakes that I see small business owners make. Until next time, take care.